The cabin lights dimmed just enough to signal that the long haul across the Atlantic was finally beginning. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under the late afternoon sun, and inside, the usual pre-flight hum of polite chatter, rustling magazines, and clinking ice cubes filled the air. First class, as always, was a bubble of calm luxury. Plush seats, crisp linens, attendants gliding by with practiced grace. But that calm shattered the moment the baby started crying. It wasn't the fussy whimper of a tired toddler. This was raw, unrelenting wailing, deep guttural sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond hunger or discomfort. The infant's face flushed crimson, tiny fists clenched, eyes squeezed shut as if the world itself had betrayed him. His father, seated beside him in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, looked like he hadn't slept in days. His jaw tightened with every cry, fingers drumming restlessly on the armrest. He tried everything: rocking, bottle, pacifier, soft coos, even pacing the narrow aisle with the baby cradled against his chest. Nothing worked. Passengers exchanged glances. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others subtly adjusted their headphones or buried themselves deeper in novels, hoping the noise would fade. But it didn't. If anything, it grew louder. The baby's cries cut through the cabin like a siren, sharp and urgent, impossible to ignore. Flight attendants approached with practiced calm, offering warm towels, extra blankets, even a gentle suggestion to try walking near the galley where the engine hum might soothe him. The man nodded politely each time, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion and something deeper, like shame. He was used to control, to solutions, to commanding boardrooms with a single glance. Here, in this metal tube soaring miles above the earth, he was powerless. Back in economy, rows and rows behind the velvet curtain that separated the classes, a teenager sat with his knees pressed together, trying not to take up too much space. He wore slightly faded jeans and a clean but well-worn t-shirt, his backpack tucked carefully under the seat in front of him. This was his first time flying alone. He'd saved for months, babysitting, mowing lawns, helping neighbors carry groceries, just to afford the ticket to a summer enrichment program in another state. His mother had kissed his forehead that morning, her eyes glistening with pride and worry. "You belong there," she'd whispered. "Don't let nobody make you feel small." He'd been nervous boarding the plane, unsure where to stow his bag, flinching when the seatbelt sign dinged. But once settled, he found comfort in routine, adjusting his earbuds, though they held no music, just silence, watching clouds drift past the window, tracing the patterns in the seat fabric with his fingertip. Then the crying started. At first, he barely noticed it over the engine roar. But soon it seeped through the cabin like a tide, persistent, heartbreaking. He glanced toward the front where the curtain swayed slightly with each pass of a flight attendant. He'd seen the father earlier during boarding, sharp shoes, confident stride, the kind of man who never waited in lines. Now that same man looked lost. The teenager remembered his baby cousins back home, how they'd scream for hours when teething, how his grandmother would hum old songs while rocking them. Songs without words, just melody and warmth, passed down through generations who knew hardship but never stopped singing. He watched as the father tried again to soothe his son, voice cracking with fatigue. The baby arched his back, screaming as if in pain. A woman in business class finally snapped, muttering something under her breath about inconsiderate parents. The teenager flinched. He knew that tone, the kind that blamed the wrong person. Minutes ticked by. The crying didn't stop. If anything, it grew more desperate. The father's shoulders slumped. He ran a hand over his face, eyes red-rimmed. In that moment, he wasn't a millionaire. He was just a dad, overwhelmed and alone in a sea of strangers. Something stirred in the teenager's chest. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. He'd felt that kind of helplessness before, watching. His mom worked double shifts just to keep the lights on, knowing there was nothing he could do but study harder, be quieter, take up less space. But this was different. He had something to offer. Not money, not status, just a song. His heart hammered as he unbuckled his seatbelt. The thought of walking into first class felt like stepping onto another planet. He'd seen movies where people like him weren't welcome in those spaces, where a wrong move could get you questioned, even removed. But the baby's cries clawed at him. He couldn't just sit there. He stood slowly, smoothing his shirt. The flight attendant nearest him, a woman with kind eyes and silver streaks in her hair, gave him a questioning look. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked softly. He swallowed. I think I might be able to help with the baby," he said, voice quieter than he intended. She blinked, surprised. "Oh? You've got little ones at home?" "No, ma'am. But my grandma, she used to sing to my cousins when they couldn't stop crying. It always worked." The attendant studied him, the earnestness in his eyes, the nervous set of his shoulders. She glanced toward the front, where the father now sat with his head in his hands, the baby still shrieking. Protocol said no crossing between cabins without reason, but human instinct said something else. "All right," she said after a pause. "But let me talk to him first." She walked ahead, bending to speak quietly to the exhausted man. He looked up, skeptical at first, then, seeing the attendant's nod toward the back, his gaze followed. He spotted the teenager standing near row 28, hands clasped, waiting. There was no arrogance in his posture, no expectation, just quiet readiness. The father hesitated, letting a stranger hold his child? On a plane? It went against every instinct honed by wealth and caution. But then his son let out another piercing wail and something in him broke. "Fine," he said hoarsely. "Just be gentle." The flight attendant beckoned. The teenager walked forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. Eyes followed him, curious, wary, some even judgmental. He kept his gaze down, focused on the carpet until he stood beside the man in the navy suit. "Hi," he said simply. "My name's Deshawn. I don't know if this'll work, but can I try holding him?" The father stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the last sleepless week, he nodded. "Please." Deshawn reached out slowly, giving the baby time to see him. He cradled the infant with the same care he'd seen his grandmother use, supporting the head, keeping movements smooth. The baby thrashed at first, confused by the new arms, the unfamiliar scent. But then Deshawn began to hum. It wasn't a real song, not one with lyrics or a name. Just a low, steady melody, warm and round, like sunlight through a window on a winter morning. He'd heard it since he was small, sung over pots of collard greens, over homework at the kitchen table, over scraped knees and broken toys. It carried comfort in its rhythm, safety in its tone, and something miraculous happened. The baby's cries hiccuped. His little body went still for a second as if listening. Then another sob tried to rise, but it faltered. Deshawn kept humming, rocking gently, his thumb brushing the baby's cheek. The infant's eyes, red and swollen, blinked open. They locked onto Deshawn's face, not with fear but with something like wonder. The wailing stopped, not faded, not quieted, stopped, as if a switch had been flipped. Silence bloomed in the cabin. Conversations paused, headphones came off, even the engines seemed to hush. The father stared, stunned, tears welling in his eyes. He hadn't heard true quiet in days. Deshawn didn't smile or gloat. He just kept humming, holding the baby close, as if this moment, this fragile, unexpected peace, was the most natural thing in the world. And in that quiet, something shifted. Not just for the baby or the father or even Deshawn, but for everyone watching. Because kindness, real kindness, doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It shows up quietly, in worn sneakers and a soft voice, and changes everything. The silence that followed was so complete. It felt like the whole plane had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. Even the hum of the engine seemed to soften, as if the aircraft itself was holding still in reverence. The baby, just moments ago a storm of red-faced sobs, now lay cradled in Deshawn's arms, eyes wide and calm, tiny fingers curled loosely around the fabric of his t-shirt. His chest rose and fell in slow, even rhythm. No hiccups, no whimpers, just peace. The father sat frozen, elbows on his knees, staring at his son like he'd never really seen him before. There were tears in his eyes, not the kind from frustration, but the kind that come when something cracks open inside you, something you didn't even know was sealed shut. He cleared his throat, but no words came. What could he say? Thank you felt too small for what had just happened. Deshawn didn't move. He kept humming, low and steady, the same melody his grandmother used to sing while stirring pots on the stove or rocking his baby cousins to sleep on summer nights thick with fireflies. It wasn't magic. It wasn't trickery. It was just love, passed down through generations who knew that sometimes the only thing a hurting soul needs is to feel held, truly held, not just physically, but in spirit. A flight attendant approached quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you mind if I take him for a moment just to give you a break? Deshawn shook his head gently. He's okay, I think he just needed to hear something familiar. The attendant smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried weight, like she'd seen a lot in her years in the sky. But not this. Not today. The father finally found his voice. How did you know? He asked, his tone rough but not unkind. Deshawn looked down at the baby, who was now blinking sleepily, eyelids heavy. My grandma used to say babies don't cry because they're bad. They cry because they're trying to tell you something, but they don't got the words yet. So you gotta listen with your hands, your voice, your heart. The man swallowed hard. He'd spent years building empires, closing deals, commanding rooms with a single sentence, but no boardroom strategy, no high-priced consultant, no luxury baby gadget had prepared him for this. A teenage boy from the back of the plane, speaking truth so simple it felt ancient. Sit, the father said suddenly, gesturing to the empty seat across the aisle, normally reserved for another first-class passenger but empty on this flight. Please, Deshawn hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be here. He belonged in row 28, with the thin seat cushion and the tray table that barely fit a meal. But the baby stirred slightly when he shifted, so he stayed standing. I should probably get back, he said softly. Don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble, the man said. And for the first time his voice didn't sound like it belonged to a CEO. It sounded like it belonged to a human being. You just gave me back my son. And maybe a little of myself too. That stopped Deshawn. He looked up, really looked at the man, not at the suit, not at the watch glinting under the cabin light, but at the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his water. This wasn't just a rich man. This was someone drowning in exhaustion and guilt, in the quiet loneliness that money can't fix. After a long pause, Deshawn nodded and carefully lowered himself into the offered seat, still holding the baby. The infant nestled against his chest like he'd found home. They sat like that for a while, no rush, no agenda. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly, pink and gold in the fading light. Inside, something quiet and real was unfolding. You traveling alone? The father finally asked. Yeah. Got accepted into this summer program. Engineering stuff. First time flying by myself. That's impressive. Deshawn shrugged. Just lucky, I guess. My school counselor pushed my application. Said I had potential. Potential, the man repeated like he was tasting the word. You know, most people with potential never get a real shot. You did. Deshawn didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never thought of himself as special. Just a kid who liked taking things apart to see how they worked, who stayed up late sketching solar panel designs in his notebook, who walked 3 miles to the library every Saturday because his neighborhood didn't have a good one. The baby let out a soft sigh, and Deshawn instinctively adjusted his hold. He's almost asleep, he murmured. I haven't seen him sleep like this in days, the man admitted. Ever since his mom, well, she's not with us anymore. Deshawn's chest tightened. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Grief has a sound, a weight. He'd heard it in his own house after his granddad passed. I'm sorry, he said simply. The man nodded, looking out the window. I thought if I gave him everything, best crib, best nanny, best doctors, he'd be okay. But he's not. He's lost, and I don't know how to be enough for him. You don't gotta be everything, Deshawn said gently. Just be there. That's what my grandma always said. Presence is the greatest present. The man turned to him then, really looked at him, his worn sneakers, his calloused hands, the quiet strength in his eyes. Where did you learn that? From watching people who loved hard, Deshawn said. Even when they didn't have much. A long silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that comes after truth has been spoken. Clean, clear, full of space for something new to grow. When the baby finally drifted off, breathing slow and deep, Deshawn carefully stood and handed him back. The father took him with trembling hands, holding him close like he might vanish if he let go. Thank you, he whispered, voice thick. I don't even know your name. Deshawn. Deshawn, the man repeated like he was memorizing it. I'm Jonathan, Deshawn nodded. Nice to meet you, sir. No, sir, Jonathan said quickly. Just, Jonathan? Deshawn gave a small smile and turned to leave, but Jonathan stopped him. Wait. He reached into his briefcase, not for a business card, but for a small notebook. He scribbled something quickly, tore out the page, and handed it over. This is my number, and the name of the program you're going to. If you ever need anything at all, call me. Deshawn took the paper but didn't look at it. I don't need anything, Mr. Jonathan. I just wanted to help. I know, Jonathan said. But let me help too. Not because I owe you, because the world needs more people like you. Deshawn didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded again and walked back toward economy, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders like a second skin. As he passed through the curtain, a few passengers gave him curious looks. One older woman smiled warmly. Another man gave a quiet thumbs up, but most just watched in silence as if they'd witnessed something sacred. Back in his seat, Deshawn tucked the folded paper into his backpack without reading it. He leaned his head against the window, watching the stars begin to dot the night sky. His heart was full, not with pride but with a quiet knowing. That kindness isn't about where you come from or what you have. It's about showing up even when it's scary, even when you're not asked. Hours later, as the plane began its descent, Jonathan sat with his sleeping son in his arms, staring at the empty seat across the aisle. He thought about the boy who'd walked into his world like a quiet storm. No fanfare, no demands, just pure, unshakable humanity. And for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his assistant. Look up everything you can on the STEM summer program in Atlanta and find out how to fund a full scholarship, tuition, housing, travel, everything. For a student named Deshawn. Then he kissed his son's forehead and whispered, We're going to be okay. And for the first time, he believed it. Meanwhile, in the back of the plane, Deshawn closed his eyes, the hum of the engines lulling him toward sleep. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this, he'd done the right thing. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The envelope sat on Deshawn's kitchen table for 3 whole days before he opened it. It had arrived the week after he got back from the flight, plain white. No return address, just his name written in neat, careful handwriting. He'd recognized it right away. He knew who it was from. But something in him hesitated, not because he was scared, but because part of him wanted to keep that moment on the plane exactly as it was. Pure, untouched, not tangled up in expectations or obligations. So he tucked it under a stack of school flyers and went about his days, helping his little sister with math homework, fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom with duct tape and hope, walking to the corner store to buy milk for his mom's morning coffee. But curiosity has a way of wearing down even the strongest resolve. On the 3rd evening after his mom had gone to bed and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, he finally slid his finger under the flap. Inside was no check. No contract. No fancy letterhead. Just 2 sheets of paper. The first was a handwritten note. Deshawn, you didn't ask for anything. That's why I'm giving you this, not as payment but as belief. I've arranged a full scholarship for you to attend the Westridge Preparatory Academy this fall. It's a small school, but their engineering and robotics programs are among the best in the country. Room, board, books, even a stipend for travel and supplies, all covered. No strings, no favors expected, just a chance. You reminded me that real strength isn't in what you own, but in what you give. My son sleeps through the night now. I think it's because he finally felt safe. And that started with you. If you say yes, I'll be there to support you, but only if you want me to. If you say no, I'll understand. Either way, thank you for seeing us when we were invisible. Jonathan. Deshaun read it twice. Then a third time, his throat tight. He'd heard of Westridge. It was the kind of school that sent kids to Ivy League colleges, that had labs with equipment he'd only seen in documentaries, that didn't even have a free lunch line because everyone there came from families who owned buildings or companies or yachts. He looked down at his hands, rough from mowing lawns, stained with grease from tinkering with old radios. Could he really walk into a place like that and belong? The second sheet was an official acceptance letter from the school itself, stamped with a seal and everything. It listed his name, the program, the start date, and a personal mentorship offer from a senior advisor, someone named Dr. Elena Ruiz, who specialized in youth innovation and community-based engineering. His mom found him still sitting at the table the next morning. The paper spread out like a map to another life. "What's all this?" she asked, pouring coffee into her chipped mug. He told her everything. The flight, the baby, the man in first class, the envelope. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she set her mug down and walked over. She didn't say, "Is this real?" or "Are you sure?" She just put her hands on his shoulders and said, "You earned this, baby. Not because you held a crying child, but because you've been holding your whole world together for years. This ain't charity. It's recognition." That settled something in him. He wrote back the same day, not an email. A real letter on notebook paper in his best handwriting. "Mr. Jonathan, thank you, I accept. Not because I think I'm better than anyone else, but because I want to learn how to build things that help people, like clean water systems or solar grids for neighborhoods like mine. If Westridge can teach me that, I'll work harder than anyone there. And if your son ever cries again, I know a song that might help." Gave to Sean. He mailed it that afternoon. The summer passed in a blur of preparation. Westridge sent a welcome packet thicker than a phone book, dorm guidelines, course catalogs, a list of required supplies that made his eyes widen. A graphing calculator alone cost more than his mom's weekly grocery run. But then a package arrived, brand new supplies neatly packed with a note. "Consider this your starter kit. Don't worry about the cost, focus on your mind." When move-in day came, Deshaun stood outside the wrought iron gates of Westridge Academy, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his backpack full of notebooks and dreams. The campus looked like something out of a movie. Ivy-covered buildings, wide green lawns. Students laughing on benches with laptops that probably cost more than his family's car. He felt like an imposter. But then he saw her, Dr. Ruiz, waiting by the admissions office, arms crossed, warm smile on her face. She was younger than he expected, with locks pulled into a bun and steel-toed boots under her slacks. "You must be Deshaun," she said, stepping forward. "I've been waiting for you." "Yeah," he said, shifting his bag. "Sorry I'm late. The bus got stuck in traffic," she laughed. "You took the bus? From the city?" He nodded. She studied him for a moment, then said, "Good. Means you know how to get where you're going without a chauffeur." She let him inside. "Listen, I don't care how you got here, scholarship, legacy, lottery ticket. What matters is what you do once you're inside these walls. And from what I've read, you're not here to just get a degree. You're here to change things." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. His dorm room was small but clean. 2 beds, a desk, a window that looked out onto a courtyard. His roommate hadn't arrived yet. Deshaun set his things down slowly, running a hand over the smooth wood of the desk. This was real. He was really here. Over the next few weeks, he worked harder than he ever had. He stayed up late studying physics, asked questions in class even when his voice shook, spent weekends in the robotics lab rebuilding motors from scrap parts just to understand how they worked. Some students eyed him sideways, his clothes too plain, his accent too city, his silence too deep. But others saw something different. A girl from rural Kentucky who'd never met anyone from his neighborhood asked him to study together after he helped her debug a coding error. A boy from Canada, quiet like him, started sitting with him at lunch. And then there was Jonathan. He didn't show up unannounced or try to check in like a benefactor. Instead, once a month, he'd send a short email. How's the water pressure in the dorms? Corita, did you try the engineering lab's 3D printer yet? No pressure. No remember who helped you. Just quiet presence. One Saturday, Deshaun got a call. It was Jonathan. My son's birthday is next week, he said. He's turning 2. He still hums that tune sometimes when he's tired. I was wondering, would you come? Just for an hour. He'd love to see you. Deshaun almost said no. He didn't want to be a story at some fancy party, the boy who saved my son. But then he remembered the baby's eyes. Wide and trusting in the middle of all that noise. I'll come, he said. The house was enormous. Stone driveway, manicured hedges, a fountain in the front yard. But inside it felt ordinary. Toys on the floor, crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the smell of pancakes still in the air. The little boy, bigger now, steadier on his feet, was playing with blocks when Deshaun walked in. He looked up, blinked, then dropped his toy and ran. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around Deshaun's legs and buried his face in his jeans. Jonathan stood in the doorway, smiling softly. He remembers you. Deshaun crouched down. Hey, buddy. The boy pointed to the piano in the corner. Song? Deshaun laughed. You want me to sing? The boy nodded vigorously. So Deshaun sat at the piano. He didn't know how to play, but he tapped out the melody with one finger, slow and simple. The boy sat beside him, swaying, eyes half closed, just like on the plane. Later, over lemonade on the back porch, Jonathan said, You've changed more than just his sleep schedule, you know? How's that? You reminded me that connection matters more than control. That showing up, really showing up, is the bravest thing a person can do. Deshaun looked out at the garden where the boy was chasing butterflies. I just did what felt right. And that's why it worked. As the sun dipped below the trees, Deshaun knew something had shifted, not just in Jonathan's life, but in his own. He wasn't just a kid from the city trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for him. He was someone who carried a song that could calm storms, someone who belonged exactly where he was needed, whether that was in a first-class cabin, a robotics lab, or a backyard full of laughter, and that was enough. More than enough. He left that evening with a drawing the boy had made for him, 2 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. On the back, in wobbly letters, Deshaun Plemy. He pinned it to the wall above his dorm desk the next day, because sometimes the most powerful things in life aren't degrees or dollars or diplomas. They're the moments when one human being sees another and chooses to reach out. By the time winter rolled around, Deshaun had stopped counting how many times he'd walked into a room and felt eyes follow him like he didn't belong. It wasn't always unkind. Sometimes it was just curiosity. The kind that comes when someone shows up looking like they've seen real life and still managed to carry themselves with quiet dignity. But belonging isn't about being looked at. It's about being seen, and slowly, steadily, that's what started to happen. Westridge wasn't easy. The coursework moved fast. The expectations were sky high, and some professors spoke in a language that felt like it came from another planet, full of terms and theories that assumed you'd grown up with summer internships at tech firms or family friends who ran research labs. But Deshaun had something they didn't teach in class: grit. The kind that comes from knowing what it feels like to go to bed hungry, to fix your own shoes with glue and string, to study by flashlight when the power's been cut off. He spent nights in the engineering lab long after everyone else had gone home, taking apart old circuit boards just to understand how they worked. He asked questions, even the stupid ones, because he'd rather look foolish for 5 minutes than stay confused forever. And slowly, the other students stopped seeing him as the scholarship kid and started seeing him as the guy who could fix the drone that kept crashing, or the one who figured out how to power a mini water purifier using only solar cells and recycled plastic. Dr. Ruiz noticed. She started pulling him into special projects, designing low-cost air quality sensors for urban neighborhoods, building prototype hand-cranked chargers for areas hit by storms. You think like an engineer, she told him one afternoon, watching him solder a connection with steady hands. But you care like a neighbor. That's rare. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just kept working. Meanwhile, Jonathan stayed in the background, not hovering, not pushing, just present. Every few weeks, he'd send a short message. Heard your team won the robotics demo. Proud of you. Or, My son asked about you again. Said you're his humming friend. Once he even mailed a care package, socks, protein bars, a book on sustainable design with a note. Thought you'd appreciate this. Keep building. Deshaun never asked for any of it, but he never turned it away either. Because he could tell this wasn't charity. It was partnership. Jonathan wasn't trying to save him. He was just walking beside him, quietly clearing a few thorns from the path so Deshaun could keep moving forward. Then came spring. The school announced a National Youth Innovation Challenge. Teams had to design a solution to a real-world problem affecting underserved communities. The prize wasn't just money. It was mentorship, lab access, and a chance to pilot the project in a real neighborhood. Deshaun knew right away what he wanted to build. Back home, his block had no clean drinking water. The pipes were old, rusted, sometimes leaking brown sludge. People bought bottled water, but it was expensive, and the plastic piled up in alleys like trash mountains. He remembered his mom boiling water for hours just to make sure it was safe. He remembered his little sister getting sick after drinking from the tap during a heat wave. So he pitched an idea, a portable, solar-powered water filtration unit made mostly from recycled materials, plastic bottles, charcoal from burnt wood, sand, and a simple UV light powered by a small solar panel. It wouldn't solve everything, but it could give a family clean water for days, even during outages or emergencies. His team loved it. They spent weeks testing, failing, redesigning. One night after their third failed prototype flooded the lab floor, Deshaun sat on the cold tile, soaked and exhausted, wondering if he was in over his head. Dr. Ruiz found him there. She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She just sat down beside him and said, "You know why your idea matters more than the others?" He shook his head. "Because you're not designing for a grade. You're designing for your sister, for your mom, for your block. That kind of purpose can't be faked. And it doesn't quit." He wiped his face, stood up, and got back to work. 2 months later, their prototype worked. Not perfectly, but well enough. It filtered out 98% of contaminants. It cost less than $20 to build, and a 10-year-old could assemble it with basic instructions. They presented it at the finals in front of judges from major tech firms, universities, even the Environmental Protection Agency. Deshaun didn't use fancy slides or buzzwords. He just held up a dirty bottle of water from his neighborhood, ran it through the filter, and drank the clean output right there on stage. The room went silent. Then erupted in applause. They won, not just first place, but a special Community Impact Award. And a promise. The design would be open-sourced, shared with schools and nonprofits across the country. That night, Deshaun called his mom. She cried so hard he could barely understand her words, but he heard the pride in every sob. "You did it, baby," she kept saying. "You really did it." A week later, Jonathan showed up at campus, not in a suit, but in jeans and a worn jacket, holding a duffel bag. "I brought my son," he said, nodding toward the little boy clinging to his hand, now tall enough to walk confidently, his eyes bright with recognition when he saw Deshaun. He insisted. They sat on a bench under a blooming cherry tree, the boy playing with a toy car in the grass. "I heard about the competition," Jonathan said. "I watched the video." "You were incredible," Deshaun shrugged. "We got lucky." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "You were prepared." "There's a difference." He paused, then reached into his bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been talking to some people, engineers, nonprofit leaders, even a few city planners. They want to help scale your filter, not just as a school project, but as a real solution. I've set up a small foundation in your name. Seed funding, legal help, a team to support you. You'll own it. You'll lead it. I'm just making sure the door stays open." Deshaun stared at the envelope like it might burn him. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Jonathan said, "but I wanted to. Because the world doesn't just need smart engineers. It needs kind ones. And you're both." The little boy looked up then, holding out his toy car. "Deshaun drive?" Deshaun smiled and took it. "Yeah, buddy. I'll drive." As he pushed the car gently across the grass, he thought about how far he'd come. From a cramped apartment with flickering lights to a campus where his ideas were being taken seriously, where people believed in him not because of where he came from, but because of where he was trying to go. Later that evening, back in his dorm, he opened the envelope. Inside were plans, contacts, even a logo someone had designed. A sun over a drop of water, with the words, "Clear Tomorrow," beneath it. He pinned it next to the crayon drawing from Jonathan's son. 2 reminders, one of where he started, one of where he was headed. Over the summer, he returned home not as a visitor but as a builder. With help from local teens, he set up a workshop in the community center basement. They built 10 filters the first week, gave them to families on his block, taught neighbors how to maintain them. One grandmother hugged him so tight he thought his ribs would crack. "You came back," she whispered. "Most kids leave and forget. I didn't forget," he said. "I just needed to learn how to help better." By fall, Clear Tomorrow had a website, a small team, and a waiting list from 3 other cities. Deshaun still went to class, still pulled all-nighters, still ate ramen when his stipend ran low. But now when he walked into a room, he didn't wonder if he belonged. He knew he did. Because belonging isn't about matching the furniture. It's about bringing something real to the table, your story, your hands, your heart. And Deshaun had all 3. One evening, as he packed for a weekend trip to test the filters in a rural town hit by flooding, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Jonathan. Proud doesn't even cover it. Keep going. Deshaun smiled, tucked his phone away, and zipped up his bag. He had work to do. Years had passed, but the sky still felt familiar, vast, quiet, full of possibility. Deshaun settled into his seat on the plane, not in first class, not in the very back, but right in the middle where the world felt most honest. He'd learned a long time ago that real life happens in the in-between places, the spaces where different stories brush up against each other, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes beautifully. He wasn't the same kid who'd boarded a plane with a backpack and a heart full of nerves. Now he carried a worn leather satchel filled with schematics, water test kits, and a small notebook where he jotted down ideas between flights. His work with Clear Tomorrow had taken him to villages in the Southwest where wells ran dry by July, to coastal towns rebuilding after hurricanes, to neighborhoods and cities where clean water was still a luxury. He didn't wear suits. He wore boots that had seen mud and concrete, shirts with faded logos from conferences he'd spoken at, and a quiet confidence that came not from awards, but from knowing he'd made a difference, one filter, one family, one conversation at a time. The plane taxied down the runway, engines humming the same old song. He glanced out the window, watching the ground fall away, and thought about how far he'd come, not just in miles, but in meaning. He'd built something that lasted, not a company, not a brand, but trust. People knew that if Deshaun showed up, he wasn't there to take photos for a press release. He was there to listen, to learn, to leave something better than he found it. A baby's cry cut through his thoughts. Not loud at first, just a soft whimper, then a frustrated grunt. He turned slightly and saw a young mother in the row ahead, bouncing a toddler on her hip, her face tight with exhaustion. The child, maybe 18 months old, was red-faced and fussy, tugging at his ear, clearly uncomfortable. The cabin lights were dim, most passengers dozing, but this little one was wide awake and unhappy. Deshaun watched for a moment. The mother tried everything, offering a snack, a toy, a bottle. She whispered soothing words, rocked gently, even stood to pace the narrow aisle. But the child only cried harder, his voice rising in pitch and panic. It was like a mirror held up to the past. He didn't hesitate. Unbuckling his seatbelt, he stood and walked forward. The mother looked up, wary at first. Strangers offering help on planes could mean anything from kindness to intrusion. But there was something in Deshaun's eyes, something calm and steady that made her pause. "Hey," he said softly, crouching slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "My name's Deshaun. I used to work with kids a lot, and I know a little trick that sometimes helps when they're upset." She hesitated, then nodded. "He's been like this since takeoff. I think his ears are bothering him." "Yeah," Deshaun said. "That happens. Mind if I try something?" She shifted the boy in her arms, and Deshaun reached out, not to take him, just to offer his hand. The toddler stared at him, tears still streaming, but the crying slowed for a second, curiosity cutting through the distress. Deshaun smiled gently. Then, without fanfare, he began to hum, the same wordless melody, the one his grandmother sang, the one that had once quieted a millionaire's son at 35,000 feet. It started low, warm, like steam rising from a cup of tea on a cold morning. He kept his eyes on the child, his posture open, his presence soft. The toddler blinked. His little chest stopped heaving. One hand reached out and grabbed Deshawn's finger, and just like that, the crying stopped. The mother let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. How did you do that? Deshawn shrugged. It's not magic, just something old, passed down. Babies don't always need fixing. Sometimes they just need to feel safe. She looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Thank you, she whispered. I was about to lose it. You're doing great, he said. Being a parent is the hardest job there is. She smiled, tears glistening. You have kids? No, he said. But I've been held by enough loving hands to know what it feels like. He stayed for a few more minutes, humming softly, letting the child grip his finger like an anchor. When the boy finally drifted off, head resting on his mother's shoulder, Deshawn stood slowly. Safe travels, he said. You too, she replied. And thank you. Really. Back in his seat, he leaned his head against the window. The clouds outside glowed silver in the moonlight. He thought about that first flight, the fear, the doubt, the moment he chose to walk forward even when every rule said he shouldn't. He thought about the letter, the scholarship, the late nights in the lab, the first time a family drank clean water from a filter he'd helped design. Most of all, he thought about the song. It wasn't his. It belonged to his grandmother, to her mother before her, to generations of people who knew that love doesn't need words to be understood. It just needs to be offered, freely, without expectation. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Jonathan. Heard you're flying out today. Say hi to the sky for me. Deshawn smiled and typed back, already did, and I passed on the song. He didn't need to explain. Jonathan would understand. Later, as the plane began its descent, the cabin lights brightened. Passengers stirred, stretching, gathering belongings. The toddler woke up, blinked around, and let out a happy gurgle. His mother caught Deshawn's eye and gave him a small, grateful nod. In that moment, he felt it, the full circle. Not as a grand finale, but as a quiet rhythm. Life wasn't about big dramatic moments. It was about showing up again and again, with your hands open and your heart ready. When he landed, he walked through the terminal with his satchel slung over his shoulder, past the luxury boutiques and the rushing crowds. At the exit, a group of high school students waited, part of a youth engineering club he'd agreed to mentor. They spotted him and waved eagerly. Mr. Deshawn, one called out. He grinned. Hey team, ready to get our hands dirty? They nodded, eyes bright with the kind of hope that only comes when someone believes in you before you even believe in yourself. As they walked toward the parking lot, one of the students asked, How'd you know you wanted to do this work? Deshawn thought for a moment. I didn't, he said. I just knew I couldn't look away when people were hurting, and I figured if I could help even a little, that was worth doing. The student nodded, quiet for a beat. Then, my cousin's baby won't stop crying at night. You think that song would work? Deshawn laughed softly. Only one way to find out, and just like that, the song would live on, not in recordings or performances, but in the quiet spaces between strangers, in the hum of a lullaby offered without asking for anything back. Years later, someone might tell the story of the millionaire's baby and the boy from the back of the plane, but the real story wasn't about wealth or class or even the miracle of a crying child falling silent. It was about how one act of courage, small, simple, human, can ripple outward in ways no one can predict. Deshawn never sought fame. He never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to be useful. And in a world that often measures worth by bank accounts or titles, that was the most radical thing of all. As the car pulled onto the highway, the city lights stretching ahead like a promise, he rolled down the window and let the wind rush in. Somewhere out there, another child was crying. Another parent was exhausted. Another teenager was wondering if they mattered. And somewhere a song was waiting to be sung. He smiled, knowing he'd be ready when the moment came.